The morning sun was just breaking through the tall pine trees when Bear McKinnon finally saw his cabin in the distance. His shoulders ached from carrying the heavy pack loaded with beaver pelts and dried meat. 2 weeks in the wilderness had been good to him. The traps had been full, and winter supplies were now secured for the months ahead. Bear was a big man with rough hands and a thick beard that had more gray in it than black these days. At 43, he had been living alone in these Colorado mountains for 15 long years. The nearest town was 3 days' ride away, and that was exactly how he liked it. People brought trouble, and Bear had seen enough trouble to last several lifetimes. As he walked closer to his small log cabin, something felt wrong. The door was slightly open, which was odd because Bear never left it that way. His steps slowed and his hand moved to the rifle slung across his shoulder. Living alone in the mountains had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming danger. He circled around to the back of the cabin, moving quietly through the trees. Bear had built this place with his own hands, choosing this spot because it gave him clear views in all directions. No one could sneak up on him here, yet someone had clearly been inside his home. The back window was broken. Glass pieces lay scattered on the ground, catching the early morning light. Bear's jaw tightened. In 15 years, no one had dared to break into his cabin. Mountain men had a code about respecting each other's property, and the few Indians who still traveled these parts knew to leave him alone. He crept to the side of the cabin and peered through a crack in the logs. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. A figure hung from the wooden rafters, completely still. Bear's first thought was that someone had been lynched in his own home. His second thought was wondering who would dare use his cabin for such a grim purpose. Moving to the front door, Bear pushed it open slowly. The hinges creaked, a sound that seemed too loud in the morning quiet. He stepped inside, rifle ready, scanning every corner for threats. The cabin was empty except for the figure hanging from the center beam. But as Bear looked closer, he realized this person was still breathing. Barely, but breathing nonetheless. It was a woman with long blonde hair that hung down like a curtain, hiding her face. Her hands were tied behind her back and a rope was around her neck. But she was standing on the tips of her toes on an overturned wooden crate. Someone had left her here to die slowly. Bear had seen many terrible things in his life, but this sight shook him. He quickly grabbed a chair and climbed up to cut the rope. The woman collapsed into his arms, unconscious and barely alive. As he carried her to his bed, he got his first clear look at her face. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with pale skin marked by cuts and bruises. Her clothes were torn and dirty, like she had been traveling rough for days or weeks. But what caught Bear's attention most were the strange marks on her left arm. Someone had burned symbols into her skin, symbols that Bear recognized immediately. Apache markings. Bear had traded with Apache bands in his younger days and knew their writing. These weren't random burns from torture. These were deliberate brands carved deep into her flesh like a permanent tattoo. The woman had been marked as belonging to an Apache tribe. Bear had many questions, but first he needed to keep her alive. He fetched water from his well and gently cleaned her wounds. Her pulse was weak but steady. The rope had left angry red marks around her neck, but it hadn't crushed her windpipe. She had been left to strangle slowly, which meant someone wanted her to suffer. As he worked to tend her injuries, the woman began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing bright blue eyes filled with fear and confusion. When she saw Bear's bearded face leaning over her, she tried to scream but could only manage a hoarse whisper. "Please," she gasped, trying to pull away from him. "Don't hurt me." Bear held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy there, miss. You're safe now. I cut you down from the rafters. You're about to die." The woman's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in her surroundings. "Where am I? Whose place is this?" "This is my cabin. Name's Bear McKinnon. I live alone out here." He poured water into a cup and offered it to her. "What's your name? Who did this to you?" She hesitated before answering, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. "My name is Lily," she finally said, accepting the water with shaking hands. "Lily Collins. I don't remember much. There was a fight and then everything went black." Bear studied her face as she spoke. Something in her voice told him she wasn't telling the complete truth, but he didn't press her. People came to the mountains to escape their past, and Bear understood that better than most. "Well, Lily Collins, you're lucky to be alive. Another hour and that rope would have finished what someone started." Bear moved to his fireplace and began building a fire. Can you tell me anything about who did this? Are they still around? Lily touched the marks on her neck gently. I think they're gone. They wanted to make an example of me, but they didn't want to stick around to watch. She paused, looking at the Apache brands on her arm. They called me terrible names. Said I was a traitor to my own people. This confirmed what Bear had suspected. The Apache markings weren't from torture or kidnapping. This woman had lived among the Apache willingly, and someone had punished her for it. In these parts, white people who chose to live with Indians were seen as traitors by both sides. Those are Apache symbols on your arm, Bear said directly. You weren't captured by them. You lived with them. Lily's face went pale. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. You don't understand. It's not what people think. I'm not judging you, Bear said quietly. I've seen enough of the world to know that things aren't always black and white. But if you're going to recover in my cabin, I need to know what kind of trouble might come looking for you. Lily was quiet for a long time, staring into the growing flames in the fireplace. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. They think I betrayed my own people, but the truth is my own people betrayed me first. Bear nodded and didn't ask for more details. He had learned long ago that people would share their stories when they were ready. For now, it was enough to know that this woman was in danger and needed help. As the day wore on, Bear prepared food and made sure Lily was comfortable. She slept most of the time, her body recovering from the ordeal. Bear used the quiet hours to think about what he should do. He could take her to the nearest town, but that might be exactly what her enemies wanted. He could send her on her way, but she was too weak to travel alone, or he could let her stay until she was strong enough to make her own choices. It had been a long time since Bear had shared his cabin with anyone, and the idea made him nervous. But looking at this broken young woman, he remembered what it felt like to need help and have nowhere to turn. That night, as Lily slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Bear sat by the window keeping watch. Something told him that finding her was going to change his quiet mountain life forever. Whether that change would be good or bad, only time would tell. 3 days had passed since Bear found Lily hanging in his cabin, and she was finally strong enough to sit up and eat solid food. The ugly rope burns around her neck were healing, though they would leave scars. The Apache brands on her arm were older, Bear noticed, probably several months old and fully healed. Bear had always been a man of few words, but having someone else in his cabin made the silence feel different, heavier somehow. He found himself listening for her breathing at night, making sure she was still alive. During the day, he caught himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Lily was not what he had expected. Most people who ended up in trouble in these mountains were either criminals or fools. But Lily was different. She knew things that surprised him. When he brought in firewood, she had already arranged the kindling in a way that would burn better. When he prepared food, she knew which wild herbs would help it taste better. These were skills learned over time, not picked up quickly. You've lived rough before, Bear observed one morning as he watched her efficiently clean and gut the fish he had caught for breakfast. Lily paused in her work, her hand still holding the sharp knife. I've had to learn many things to survive, she said carefully. Bear poured coffee into 2 cups and offered her one. In the 3 days she had been here, this was the most comfortable conversation they had managed. Usually they moved around each other like strangers, polite but distant. The Apache symbols on your arm, Bear said, settling into his chair by the fireplace. They're not prisoner markings. They're family markings. Lily's hand instinctively moved to cover the brands. How do you know about Apache markings? I've traded with them before. Years ago when there were still large bands moving through this territory. Bear sipped his coffee and studied her face. Those marks say you belong to someone important. A warrior probably, maybe even a chief. For the first time since he found her, Lily's careful mask slipped. Pain flashed across her features, raw and fresh like an open wound. She set down the knife and wrapped her arms around herself. His name was Running Wolf, she whispered. And yes, he was important to his people. Bear waited for her to continue, but she had closed up again, staring into the fire. He understood that look. It was the same expression he wore when people asked about his life before the mountains. What happened to him? Bear asked gently. The soldiers killed him. Lily's voice was flat, emotionless. They killed all of them. The whole band. Men, women, children, everyone. Bear had heard stories like this before. The Indian wars were winding down, but there were still military units that believed the only good Indian was a dead Indian. Some officers had built their careers on such massacres, and you survived because you were white, Bear said, understanding beginning to dawn. I survived because I was away from camp when it happened. When I came back, Lily stopped talking and shook her head. There was nothing left, nothing. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Bear had seen the aftermath of Indian raids on white settlements, but he had never thought much about what happened when the situation was reversed. Now he was beginning to understand why someone had left Lily to die in his rafters. The people who did this to you, Bear said. They were soldiers? Some were soldiers. Others were just men from the nearest town who thought they were doing their patriotic duty. Lily's voice was getting stronger, anger replacing the pain. They said I was a traitor, that I had chosen the savages over my own people. Bear refilled his coffee cup and thought about this. He had lived alone for so long that he sometimes forgot how cruel people could be to each other. In the mountains, you survived by helping each other when you could and staying out of each other's way when you couldn't. But down in the settlements, people seemed to enjoy finding reasons to hate. Why did you stay with the Apache? Bear asked. Most white captives try to escape. Lily looked at him sharply as if trying to decide whether his question was a trap. Who said I was captured? No one. But most people would assume that's what happened. Most people assume a lot of things. Lily stood up and walked to the small window, looking out at the mountains. My family was killed when I was 19. Not by Indians. By white men who wanted our land. Bear felt something cold settle in his stomach. What do you mean? We had a small farm in a valley about 50 miles south of here. Good water, fertile soil. My father had legal claim to it, bought and paid for. Lily's reflection in the window looked haunted. But some important men in town wanted that land for themselves. They came one night with masks and guns. And your family, my parents and little brother, shot down like animals. Lily's voice was steady, but Bear could see her hands shaking. They burned the house with me inside, but I got out. Barely. Bear was beginning to understand why Lily had found refuge with the Apache. And the Apache found you. Running Wolf found me half dead from smoke and burns, hiding in the woods like a wild animal. His band took me in, healed me, gave me a place to belong. For the first time since he had known her, Lily smiled. They never asked me to explain myself or prove I deserved to live. They just accepted me, and you fell in love. I fell in love with all of them. The way they lived, the way they treated each other, the way they saw the world. Lily turned from the window to face Bear. But yes, I fell in love with Running Wolf too. Bear was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her story. It explained the Apache markings, the skills she had shown, and the reason someone had wanted to make an example of her. In the eyes of most white settlers, she had committed the ultimate betrayal. How long were you with them? Bear asked. 2 years. The best 2 years of my life. Lily sat back down across from him. Running Wolf taught me to hunt, to track, to read the signs in the forest. His mother taught me to prepare food and medicine from plants. His sister taught me their language and customs. And then the soldiers came. Lily nodded, her expression growing dark. Captain Morrison and his men. They had been hunting Running Wolf's band for months, claiming they were raiding settlements. But it wasn't true. Running Wolf was a peaceful man. He just wanted his people to be left alone. Bear had heard the name Morrison before. Captain James Morrison was known throughout the territory as a hard man who believed Indians were obstacles to progress. He had a reputation for being thorough in his work. Morrison found your camp. A traitor betrayed us for reward money. Told Morrison exactly where to find us and when the warriors would be away hunting. Lily's hands clenched into fists. They attacked at dawn. Mostly women, children, and old people in camp. But you weren't there. I was gathering medicine plants with Running Wolf's grandmother. We were about 2 miles away when we heard the gunshots. Lily's voice broke slightly. By the time we got back, it was over. Bear could imagine the scene. He had seen the aftermath of battles before, and they were never pretty. What happened to the grandmother? She died that winter. I think her heart just gave up. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I buried her next to Running Wolf and tried to figure out what to do next, and that's when they caught you. I was trying to reach the reservation, thinking maybe I could find other survivors there. But Morrison had put word out that there was a white woman who had been living with the Apache. He offered a reward for information about me. Bear was starting to understand the full picture now. So they caught you and decided to make an example. They said hanging was too good for a traitor like me. They wanted people to see what happened to whites who chose Indians over their own kind. Lily touched the rope burns on her neck. If you hadn't come back when you did. Bear nodded grimly. Someone wanted to send a message, and you were going to be that message. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Bear found himself wondering what kind of man could order the death of an entire band of peaceful Indians, then hunt down a grieving woman for the crime of loving them. "What will you do now?" Bear asked eventually. Lily shrugged. "I don't know. I can't go back to any white settlement. Too many people know my story now. But I can't go to the reservation either. The Apache there wouldn't trust me after what happened to Running Wolf's band." Bear understood her dilemma. She was caught between two worlds, welcome in neither. It was a lonely place to be, and Bear knew something about loneliness. "You could stay here for a while," he found himself saying, surprising them both, "until you figure out what comes next." Lily looked at him with those bright blue eyes, searching his face for signs of deception or pity. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Bear thought about that question. Why was he offering shelter to a woman who could bring nothing but trouble to his peaceful mountain life? "Maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said finally. "And maybe because 15 years is long enough for any man to live alone." A week had passed since Bear offered to let Lily stay, and they had settled into an unexpected routine. Bear would rise before dawn to check his trap lines, while Lily tended the cabin and prepared their meals. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories of their past lives like two old friends. But Bear could sense that Lily was still holding something back. There were moments when she would stop mid-sentence, as if catching herself before revealing too much. Her eyes would grow distant, and she would touch the Apache brands on her arm like they caused her physical pain. On this particular evening, a late autumn storm was brewing outside. The wind howled through the pine trees and rain drummed against the cabin windows. Bear was repairing a broken trap while Lily mended one of his shirts by the firelight. "Bear," Lily said suddenly, setting down her sewing, "there's something I need to tell you about these marks on my arm." Bear looked up from his work. In the dancing light of the fire, the brands on her arm seemed to move and shift like living things. "I'm listening." Lily took a deep breath as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I told you that Running Wolf's band accepted me, and that's true. But I didn't tell you everything about how I became part of their family." Bear set down his trap and gave her his full attention. He had learned that when Lily was ready to share something important, it was best to listen carefully. "When Running Wolf found me after my family was killed, I was more dead than alive, not just from the smoke and burns, but from grief. I wanted to die." Lily's voice was quiet, barely audible over the storm outside. "For weeks I wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't do anything but stare at the sky and wish the whole world would just disappear." Bear nodded, understanding that feeling all too well. He had felt the same way after losing his own family. Running Wolf's mother, White Dove, took care of me like I was her own daughter. She fed me when I wouldn't feed myself, talked to me when I wouldn't answer, held me when the nightmares came. Lily's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She saved my life in every way that mattered." "She sounds like a good woman," Bear said gently. "She was the best woman I ever knew. And when I finally started to heal, she made me an offer." Lily held up her arm, showing the Apache brands clearly in the firelight. "She said I could stay with their band as a guest, or I could become part of their family for real." Bear studied the symbols more closely. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see that they weren't just ownership marks. They were more complex than that, telling a story in the Apache way. "These aren't just tribal markings," Bear realized. "They're adoption markings," Lily nodded. "White Dove asked the tribal council to formally adopt me as her daughter. It was a great honor, but it also meant I was making a choice that could never be undone. You were choosing to become Apache. I was choosing to become part of a family that loved me, instead of mourning for people who were already gone." Lily traced the brands with her finger. The ceremony was beautiful. The whole band gathered around while the tribal elder burned these symbols into my skin. Each mark represents a different promise. Bear leaned forward, genuinely curious. "What kind of promises?" "This one means I will always protect the children of the tribe as if they were my own." Lily pointed to the first symbol. "This one means I will share my skills and knowledge for the good of all. This one means I will never betray the location of the band to enemies." The last symbol was larger than the others. burned deeper into her skin. And this one? This one means I am bound to the tribe until death. That even if I leave, part of my spirit will always belong to them. Lily's voice cracked slightly. When I made those promises, I meant every word. Bear was beginning to understand why the soldiers and townspeople had been so angry with Lily. In their eyes, she hadn't just lived with Indians, she had actually become one. And Running Wolf? Bear asked. When did you fall in love with him? A sad smile crossed Lily's face. Running Wolf was White Dove's youngest son, about my age. He had been married before, but his wife died in childbirth along with their baby. Like me, he was grieving and trying to figure out how to live with loss. So you helped each other heal. We did. It started as friendship. Two damaged people who understood each other's pain. But over time it became something deeper. Lily's smile grew warmer. Running Wolf was gentle and patient and funny. He made me remember what it felt like to be happy. Bear could hear the love in her voice when she spoke about Running Wolf, and it made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Did you marry him in the Apache way? Yes. Another ceremony, more marks burned into my skin. Lily rolled up her sleeve to show Bear additional symbols on her upper arm that he hadn't noticed before. These marks identify me as Running Wolf's wife and declare our intention to build a life together. Looking at all the brands covering Lily's arm, Bear began to understand the full weight of what she had lost. These weren't just scars from torture or punishment. They were the permanent record of promises made and a life lived with people who had loved her. That's why they called you Apache's lover, Bear said, the pieces finally falling into place. It wasn't just because you lived with them. You had formally joined their tribe. Captain Morrison knew about the adoption ceremony. He knew about my marriage to Running Wolf. When his men caught me, he said I had committed treason against my own race. Lily's voice turned bitter. He said the only way to redeem myself was to tell him the location of other Apache bands still hiding in the mountains. And you refused. Of course I refused. Those promises I made weren't just words burned into my skin. They were sacred vows. Lily stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the stormy night. Morrison said if I wouldn't help him hunt down more Indians, then I would serve as an example to other whites who might be tempted to join them. Bear felt a surge of anger at the thought of Morrison and his men torturing this woman for the crime of finding love and family, where she could. So they branded you again. They heated up an iron and burned Apache's lover right over my adoption marks, trying to turn something sacred into something shameful. Lily's voice was steady, but Bear could see her shoulders shaking. Then they strung me up in your cabin to die slowly, hoping someone would find my body and spread the word about what happens to traitors. The storm outside seemed to be growing stronger, matching Bear's mood. He had seen a lot of cruelty in his 43 years, but there was something particularly vicious about what had been done to Lily. Morrison is still out there, Bear said. It wasn't a question. Yes, and he knows I escaped. Lily turned from the window to face him. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Bear. By helping me, you've made yourself an enemy of the Territorial Army. Morrison won't just let this go. Bear stood up and walked to his gun rack, checking his rifles. Let him come. I've been living in these mountains longer than Morrison has been wearing a uniform. If he wants trouble, I can give him more than he can handle. You don't understand. Morrison isn't just some regular Army officer. He has connections in Washington, friends who believe his methods are necessary for winning the Indian Wars. Lily moved to stand beside Bear. If he decides you're harboring a traitor, he can bring the full weight of the territorial government down on you. Then maybe it's time someone stood up to him, Bear said grimly. Lily studied his face in the flickering firelight. Why are you willing to risk so much for me? You barely know me. Bear was quiet for a long moment, thinking about her question. Why was he ready to make an enemy of the Territorial Army for a woman he had known for barely a week? I've spent 15 years running from the world, hiding in these mountains because I thought civilization had nothing left to offer me, Bear said finally. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe there are still people worth fighting for. Even an Apache's lover? Lily asked, her voice barely audible. Bear looked at her, really looked at her, standing there in his cabin with her branded arms and her fierce blue eyes and her heart full of grief for people who had loved her. She was the bravest person he had ever met, especially an Apache's lover, Bear said firmly. Those brands on your arm aren't marks of shame. They're proof that you know how to love people enough to sacrifice everything for them. The world needs more people like that, not fewer. Outside, thunder crashed over the mountains and lightning illuminated the cabin windows. But inside, by the warm glow of the fireplace, two lonely people had found something worth protecting in each other. Morrison will come looking for me eventually, Lily warned. Bear smiled grimly and began loading his rifles. Then we'd better be ready for him. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, and Bear was starting to think they might actually be safe in his remote mountain hideaway. Then Jake Hawkins rode up to the cabin with news that changed everything. Jake was an old-timer who ran a trading post about 30 miles to the east. He made the rounds to all the mountain cabins every few months, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. Bear had known him for years and trusted him as much as he trusted anyone. "Bear, we need to talk," Jake said as he dismounted his horse. His weathered face was grim and he kept glancing around nervously as if expecting trouble to come riding over the ridge at any moment. Bear stepped outside, closing the cabin door behind him to keep Lily out of sight. "What's got you looking so spooked, Jake?" "There's a military patrol asking questions about you down in Pinewood. A Captain Morrison and about 20 soldiers." Jake lowered his voice. "They're offering a $100 reward for information about a blonde woman who might be hiding in the mountains." Bear's blood went cold. $100 was more money than most mountain folk saw in a year. That kind of reward would tempt even honest people to turn in their neighbors. "What kind of questions are they asking?" Bear kept his voice steady, but his mind was already racing through plans and preparations. "Morrison claims this woman is a dangerous criminal who helped Indians attack wagon trains. Says she's armed and not to be trusted." Jake spat in the dirt. "But the way he talks about her, Bear, it's personal with him. Real personal. Did anyone tell him about my cabin?" Jake hesitated, which told Bear everything he needed to know. "Tom Wheeler mentioned that you live up here alone. Didn't mean no harm by it. Morrison was asking about all the mountain men in the area." Bear nodded grimly. Tom Wheeler was a decent man who wouldn't intentionally cause trouble, but he wasn't smart enough to recognize when he was being used. "How long ago was this?" Bear asked. "Yesterday morning?" Morrison said they'd be starting their search today. Jake looked around the clearing again. "Bear, is there something I should know about? If you're in trouble." Bear considered how much to tell Jake. The old trader was trustworthy, but the less he knew, the safer he would be. "There's a woman here who needs help," Bear said finally. "She's not a criminal and she didn't attack any wagon trains, but Morrison wants her dead for his own reasons." Jake studied Bear's face carefully. In all the years they had known each other, Bear had never asked for anything or gotten involved in other people's problems. If he was protecting this woman, Jake figured she must deserve it. "What do you need from me?" Jake asked simply. "Information. Let me know if Morrison's patrol gets close to this area, and if anyone asks, you haven't seen me in months." Jake nodded and climbed back onto his horse. "Be careful, Bear. Morrison has a reputation for getting what he wants, no matter who gets hurt in the process." After Jake rode away, Bear went back inside the cabin. Lily was standing by the window, having heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "He found me," she said quietly. "Not yet, but he's looking, and he's got the resources to search every mountain cabin in the territory if he has to." Bear moved to his gun cabinet and began checking his weapons. "We need to decide what we're going to do about it. I should leave. If Morrison is offering rewards, people will start talking. It's only a matter of time before someone leads him here." Lily sat down heavily in her chair by the fireplace. "I won't let you get hurt because of me." Bear looked at her sitting there, still healing from her ordeal, but ready to face the wilderness alone to protect him. Something fierce and protective stirred in his chest. "Where would you go?" Bear asked. "Morrison has the whole territory stirred up against you. There's nowhere you'd be safe. I could head north to Canada, or maybe west to California." Lily's voice lacked conviction. They both knew she wouldn't make it 50 miles on her own with half the territory looking for her. "Or you could stay here and we could face this together," Bear said. Lily looked up at him with those bright blue eyes. "You don't understand what you're saying. Morrison isn't just some local sheriff who'll give up if things get difficult. He's a career military officer who sees hunting me down as his personal mission. Then maybe it's time someone taught him that his personal missions have consequences," Bear replied. Bear had been thinking about this ever since Jake rode away. For 15 years, he had avoided conflict by staying away from people. But some fights couldn't be avoided and some things were worth fighting for. Lily, I've spent half my life running from trouble. Lost my family because I wasn't there to protect them when danger came calling. I won't make that mistake again. This isn't your fight, Lily protested. It became my fight the moment I cut you down from those rafters. Bear sat down across from her. Besides, Morrison made it personal when he used my cabin for his sick little message. Over the next few days, Bear began preparing for the inevitable confrontation. He scouted the approaches to his cabin, identifying the best places for ambushes and defensive positions. He moved extra ammunition and supplies to hidden caches in the woods. Most importantly, he began teaching Lily how to use the mountain terrain to their advantage. If shooting starts, you head for that big pine tree with the split trunk, Bear explained as they walked the perimeter of his property. From there you can see anyone coming up the main trail, but they can't see you. Lily proved to be a quick learner. Her time with the Apache had taught her to move quietly through the forest and read the signs of approaching danger. She understood tactics in a way that most white women wouldn't. Running. Wolf taught me that the best way to win a fight is to avoid having one in the first place, she said as they practiced moving silently through the underbrush. But if you have to fight, you fight to win. Smart man, Bear observed. What else did he teach you? That every piece of ground has advantages and disadvantages. The key is to fight where the ground favors you, not your enemy. Lily paused beside a large boulder that provided perfect cover while commanding a view of the valley below. Morrison's men are used to fighting on open plains and desert. These mountains will be foreign to them. Bear nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I was thinking. As they prepared for Morrison's arrival, Bear found himself watching Lily in unguarded moments. She moved with the confidence of someone who had survived real danger before. When she cleaned her rifle, her movements were precise and practiced. When she studied the terrain around the cabin, her eyes missed nothing important. This wasn't some helpless victim waiting to be rescued. This was a woman who had already survived more hardship than most men ever faced. The thought of Morrison hunting her like some kind of animal made Bear's anger burn hotter. On the third night after Jake's visit, Bear was checking his perimeter traps when he heard the soft whistle that meant Lily had spotted something. He immediately melted into the shadows and worked his way back toward the cabin. Lily met him at their prearranged position behind a cluster of large rocks. Riders, she whispered. 3 of them coming up the main trail. They're trying to be quiet, but their horses are shod. The metal shoes on rock give them away. Bear listened carefully and heard what Lily had detected. The faint click of horseshoes against stone, carrying clearly in the crisp mountain air. Morrison's scouts, Bear said grimly. They're getting close enough to watch the cabin during daylight hours. What do we do? Bear thought for a moment. Morrison was clearly planning to surround the cabin and force a surrender. But that would only work if Bear and Lily stayed put and waited for it to happen. We're going to give them something to watch, Bear said finally. But it won't be us. That night, Bear and Lily carefully prepared a deception. They built up the fire in the cabin and arranged blankets to cast human-shaped shadows on the windows. They left a lamp burning and even hung some of Lily's clothes on a line where they could be seen from a distance. Then they gathered their weapons and supplies and slipped away into the darkness. Heading for a secondary camp, Bear had prepared deeper in the mountains. If Morrison wanted to play hunter and prey, Bear was going to show him what it felt like to be the one being hunted. Where are we going? Lily whispered as they moved through the forest. Somewhere we can control the terms of engagement, Bear replied. Morrison thinks he's closing in on a helpless woman hiding in a cabin. He's about to learn that he's been hunting a ghost. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Bear heard the distant sound of gunfire coming from the direction of his cabin. He and Lily had been taking turns keeping watch through the night, and the shooting meant that Morrison's men had finally made their move. They're attacking the cabin, Lily whispered, joining Bear at the cave entrance behind the waterfall. Bear listened to the pattern of the gunshots, multiple rifles firing in coordinated volleys, the way soldiers were trained to do. Morrison's not taking any chances. He's treating this like a full military operation. They waited tensely as the shooting continued for several minutes, then gradually died away. Bear could imagine the scene. Soldiers surrounding his empty cabin, pouring rifle fire through the windows, then cautiously approaching to find nothing but shadows and decoy blankets. He's going to be furious when he realizes we're not there, Lily said. Good, angry men make mistakes. Bear gathered his rifle and ammunition, but he'll also start expanding his search. We can't stay hidden here much longer." Sure enough, within an hour they could hear the sounds of men and horses moving through the forest around their position. Morrison had obviously brought more soldiers than Jake had reported, and they were conducting a systematic search of every possible hiding place in the area. "There must be at least 40 men out there," Lily observed, listening to the voices calling to each other through the trees. Bear nodded grimly. Morrison wasn't just hunting them, he was conducting a military campaign. The captain had clearly decided that capturing Lily was worth whatever resources it took. "Bear, look at this," Lily said, pointing through a gap in the rocks. Bear followed her gaze and saw a man in civilian clothes moving carefully through the forest about 100 yards away. Unlike the soldiers, this man moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in the wilderness. "Half-breed tracker," Bear said quietly. "Morrison must have hired him to read our trail." The tracker was good at his job. Even from their hiding place, Bear could see him examining broken twigs, disturbed earth, and other signs that would be invisible to most people. Worse, he was methodically working his way toward their position. "He's going to find us," Lily said. "Not if I find him first." Bear checked his rifle and began moving toward the cave entrance. "Wait." Lily grabbed his arm. "There are too many of them. If you shoot the tracker, every soldier within a mile will come running." Bear knew she was right, but they were running out of options. The tracker was maybe 20 minutes away from discovering their hideout, and once he did, they would be trapped in the cave with no way out. "Then we need to leave now, before he gets any closer," Bear said. They quickly gathered their essential supplies, leaving behind everything that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival. Bear led the way deeper into the cave system, following passages he had explored years earlier when he first built his cabin. The caves extended for miles through the mountain, with multiple entrances and hidden chambers that few people knew about. If they could reach the far exit without being detected, they might be able to slip away before Morrison realized they had moved. But as they worked their way through the narrow passages, they could hear voices echoing through the cave system behind them. Morrison's men had found the waterfall entrance and were following their trail. "They're persistent," Lily whispered as they paused to listen. "Morrison's made this personal," Bear replied. "He's not going to give up until he has you or until someone stops him permanently." They emerged from the caves on the far side of the mountain, nearly 3 miles from their original position. The sun was high in the sky now, and Bear could see smoke rising from several locations in the valley below. Morrison's men had obviously set up multiple camps to coordinate their search. "Look at that," Lily said, pointing to a group of horsemen moving along the main trail. "They're not just searching randomly. They're setting up a perimeter to keep us from escaping the area." Bear studied the positions of Morrison's forces and realized that the captain was using classic military tactics. He had divided his men into hunting parties to flush out his prey, while positioning other units to block all the escape routes. "He's trying to drive us toward the old mining camp," Bear observed, recognizing the pattern. The abandoned mining camp was located in a narrow valley with only one way in or out, perfect for a trap. Morrison was probably hoping to corner them there where his numerical advantage would be overwhelming. "So we don't go to the mining camp," Lily said. "No, we don't. But we need to find somewhere else to make our stand." Bear shouldered his pack and started moving along the ridgeline. "Morrison has too many men for us to keep running indefinitely. Eventually, we'll have to turn and fight." As they moved through the high country, staying off the main trails and using every bit of cover the terrain provided, Bear began looking for a defensible position. He needed somewhere with good sight lines, multiple escape routes, and natural obstacles that would limit Morrison's ability to use his superior numbers. Late in the afternoon, they found what Bear was looking for: a rocky outcropping that commanded views in all directions, with steep cliffs on 3 sides and only one narrow approach that enemies would have to cross in the open. "This is it," Bear said, studying the position. "If Morrison wants a fight, we'll give him one on our terms." They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing their defenses. Bear positioned rocks to create firing positions that would protect them from return fire, while giving them clear shots at anyone trying to approach. Lily gathered loose stones that could be rolled down on attackers, turning the natural terrain into a weapon. "How many rounds do we have?" Lily asked as she organized their ammunition. "About 60 rifle cartridges and maybe 40 pistol rounds," Bear replied. Enough for a good fight, but not enough for a long siege. Then we'll have to make every shot count. As darkness fell, they could see campfires scattered throughout the valley below, Morrison's men settling in for the night. Bear counted at least 6 separate camps, confirming that they were badly outnumbered. He's planning to resume the search at first light, Bear said. Probably with even more men. I wouldn't be surprised if he sent for reinforcements. Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the enemy campfires. Bear, there's something I need to tell you before this goes any further. What is it? Morrison didn't just hunt down Running Wolf's band because they were Apache. He did it because Running Wolf had something Morrison wanted. Lily's voice was tight with old anger. Information about a gold deposit the tribe had discovered in the Black Hills. Bear felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Gold changes everything. Running Wolf showed me the deposit once. It was massive, enough to make whoever controlled it incredibly wealthy. But Running Wolf refused to tell anyone else about it, even other Apache bands. He said the gold would only bring death and destruction to his people. So Morrison tortured him for the location. Morrison tried, but Running Wolf died before he revealed anything. Lily met Bear's eyes. That's why Morrison is so desperate to capture me. He thinks Running Wolf shared the secret with me before he died. Bear understood now why Morrison was willing to commit so many resources to hunting one woman. This wasn't just about military discipline or making examples. This was about gold fever and the fortune that could be made from a major strike. Did he share the location with you? Lily nodded slowly. Running Wolf made me promise to keep the secret safe even if it cost me my life. He said the gold was cursed, that it would destroy anyone who tried to take it from the earth. Do you believe that? I believe that men will do terrible things for gold. Look what Morrison has already done just for the chance of learning where it is. Lily checked her rifle one more time. If he captures me, he'll torture me until I tell him everything. And then he'll use that gold to buy himself a political career built on the bones of dead Indians. Bear looked down at the campfires scattered through the valley and felt his resolve harden. Morrison wasn't just hunting them. He was willing to commit what amounted to murder for personal gain. That made him more than just a soldier following orders. It made him a criminal who needed to be stopped. Then we make sure he doesn't capture you, Bear said firmly. Even if it means fighting the entire territorial army? Even if it means that. Bear reached over and took Lily's hand. Some fights are worth having, regardless of the odds. They settled in to wait for dawn, taking turns keeping watch while the other tried to rest. Bear found himself thinking about the choices that had brought them to this moment. His decision to help Lily, her decision to trust him, Morrison's decision to make this personal. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, and Bear knew that not all of them would survive it. But looking at Lily sleeping peacefully beside their small fire, he realized he had no regrets. For the first time in 15 years, he was fighting for something that mattered more than his own survival. The gold that Morrison wanted so badly had indeed brought death and destruction, just as Running Wolf had predicted. But it had also brought Bear and Lily together and given them both a reason to stand against injustice. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Bear heard the distant sound of gunfire coming from the direction of his cabin. He and Lily had been taking turns keeping watch through the night, and the shooting meant that Morrison's men had finally made their move. They're attacking the cabin, Lily whispered, joining Bear at the cave entrance behind the waterfall. Bear listened to the pattern of the gunshots, multiple rifles firing in coordinated volleys, the way soldiers were trained to do. Morrison's not taking any chances. He's treating this like a full military operation. They waited tensely as the shooting continued for several minutes, then gradually died away. Bear could imagine the scene. Soldiers surrounding his empty cabin, pouring rifle fire through the windows, then cautiously approaching to find nothing but shadows and decoy blankets. He's going to be furious when he realizes we're not there. Lily said, good angry men make mistakes. Bear gathered his rifle and ammunition, but he'll also start expanding his search. We can't stay hidden here much longer. Sure enough, within an hour they could hear the sounds of men and horses moving through the forest around their position. Morrison had obviously brought more soldiers than Jake had reported, and they were conducting a systematic search of every possible hiding place in the area. There must be at least 40 men out there, Lily observed, listening to the voices calling to each other through the trees. Bear nodded grimly. Morrison wasn't just hunting them. He was conducting a military campaign. The captain had clearly decided that capturing Lily was worth whatever resources it took. "Bear, look at this," Lily said, pointing through a gap in the rocks. Bear followed her gaze and saw a man in civilian clothes moving carefully through the forest about 100 yards away. Unlike the soldiers, this man moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in the wilderness. "Half-breed tracker," Bear said quietly. "Morrison must have hired him to read our trail." The tracker was good at his job. Even from their hiding place, Bear could see him examining broken twigs, disturbed earth, and other signs that would be invisible to most people. Worse, he was methodically working his way toward their position. "He's going to find us," Lily said. "Not if I find him first." Bear checked his rifle and began moving toward the cave entrance. "Wait." Lily grabbed his arm. "There are too many of them. If you shoot the tracker, every soldier within a mile will come running." Bear knew she was right, but they were running out of options. The tracker was maybe 20 minutes away from discovering their hideout, and once he did, they would be trapped in the cave with no way out. "Then we need to leave now, before he gets any closer," Bear said. They quickly gathered their essential supplies, leaving behind everything that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival. Bear led the way deeper into the cave system, following passages he had explored years earlier when he first built his cabin. The caves extended for miles through the mountain, with multiple entrances and hidden chambers that few people knew about. If they could reach the far exit without being detected, they might be able to slip away before Morrison realized they had moved. But as they worked their way through the narrow passages, they could hear voices echoing through the cave system behind them. Morrison's men had found the waterfall entrance and were following their trail. "They're persistent," Lily whispered as they paused to listen. "Morrison's made this personal," Bear replied. "He's not going to give up until he has you or until someone stops him permanently." They emerged from the caves on the far side of the mountain, nearly 3 miles from their original position. The sun was high in the sky now, and Bear could see smoke rising from several locations in the valley below. Morrison's men had obviously set up multiple camps to coordinate their search. "Look at that," Lily said, pointing to a group of horsemen moving along the main trail. "They're not just searching randomly. They're setting up a perimeter to keep us from escaping the area." Bear studied the positions of Morrison's forces and realized that the captain was using classic military tactics. He had divided his men into hunting parties to flush out his prey, while positioning other units to block all the escape routes. "He's trying to drive us toward the old mining camp," Bear observed, recognizing the pattern. The abandoned mining camp was located in a narrow valley with only one way in or out, perfect for a trap. Morrison was probably hoping to corner them there where his numerical advantage would be overwhelming. "So we don't go to the mining camp," Lily said. "No, we don't. But we need to find somewhere else to make our stand." Bear shouldered his pack and started moving along the ridgeline. "Morrison has too many men for us to keep running indefinitely. Eventually, we'll have to turn and fight." As they moved through the high country, staying off the main trails and using every bit of cover the terrain provided, Bear began looking for a defensible position. He needed somewhere with good sight lines, multiple escape routes, and natural obstacles that would limit Morrison's ability to use his superior numbers. Late in the afternoon, they found what Bear was looking for: a rocky outcropping that commanded views in all directions, with steep cliffs on 3 sides and only one narrow approach that enemies would have to cross in the open. "This is it," Bear said, studying the position. "If Morrison wants a fight, we'll give him one on our terms." They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing their defenses. Bear positioned rocks to create firing positions that would protect them from return fire, while giving them clear shots at anyone trying to approach. Lily gathered loose stones that could be rolled down on attackers, turning the natural terrain into a weapon. "How many rounds do we have?" Lily asked as she organized their ammunition. "About 60 rifle cartridges and maybe 40 pistol rounds," Bear replied. "Enough for a good fight, but not enough for a long siege. Then we'll have to make every shot count." As darkness fell, they could see campfires scattered throughout the valley below, Morrison's men settling in for the night. Bear counted at least 6 separate camps, confirming that they were badly outnumbered. "He's planning to resume the search at first light," Bear said, "probably with even more men. I wouldn't be surprised if he sent for reinforcements." Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the enemy campfires. Bear, there's something I need to tell you before this goes any further. What is it? Morrison didn't just hunt down Running Wolf's band because they were Apache. He did it because Running Wolf had something Morrison wanted. Lily's voice was tight with old anger. Information about a gold deposit the tribe had discovered in the Black Hills. Bear felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Gold changes everything. Running Wolf showed me the deposit once. It was massive, enough to make whoever controlled it incredibly wealthy. But Running Wolf refused to tell anyone else about it, even other Apache bands. He said the gold would only bring death and destruction to his people. So Morrison tortured him for the location. Morrison tried, but Running Wolf died before he revealed anything. Lily met Bear's eyes. That's why Morrison is so desperate to capture me. He thinks Running Wolf shared the secret with me before he died. Bear understood now why Morrison was willing to commit so many resources to hunting one woman. This wasn't just about military discipline or making examples. This was about gold fever and the fortune that could be made from a major strike. Did he share the location with you? Lily nodded slowly. Running Wolf made me promise to keep the secret safe even if it cost me my life. He said the gold was cursed, that it would destroy anyone who tried to take it from the earth. Do you believe that? I believe that men will do terrible things for gold. Look what Morrison has already done just for the chance of learning where it is. Lily checked her rifle one more time. If he captures me, he'll torture me until I tell him everything. And then he'll use that gold to buy himself a political career built on the bones of dead Indians. Bear looked down at the campfires scattered through the valley and felt his resolve harden. Morrison wasn't just hunting them. He was willing to commit what amounted to murder for personal gain. That made him more than just a soldier following orders. It made him a criminal who needed to be stopped. Then we make sure he doesn't capture you, Bear said firmly. Even if it means fighting the entire territorial army? Even if it means that. Bear reached over and took Lily's hand. Some fights are worth having, regardless of the odds. They settled in to wait for dawn, taking turns keeping watch while the other tried to rest. Bear found himself thinking about the choices that had brought them to this moment. His decision to help Lily, her decision to trust him, Morrison's decision to make this personal. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, and Bear knew that not all of them would survive it. But looking at Lily sleeping peacefully beside their small fire, he realized he had no regrets. For the first time in 15 years, he was fighting for something that mattered more than his own survival. The gold that Morrison wanted so badly had indeed brought death and destruction, just as Running Wolf had predicted. But it had also brought Bear and Lily together and given them both a reason to stand against injustice. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The first light of dawn was creeping over the eastern peaks when Bear spotted movement in the valley below. Morrison's men were breaking camp and forming into organized search parties, just as he had predicted. But what Bear saw made his blood run cold. There weren't 40 soldiers down there. There were at least 60, maybe more. He brought reinforcements during the night, Bear said quietly, handing Lily his field glasses. Lily studied the force assembling below them. Look at how they're organized. 3 main groups with scouts ranging ahead of each one. They're going to sweep the entire area systematically. Bear watched the tactical deployment with growing concern. Morrison wasn't just conducting a manhunt anymore. He was running a full military operation designed to leave no stone unturned. The captain had clearly decided that capturing Lily was worth whatever it cost. The group on the left is heading for the old mining camp, Lily observed. The center group is moving toward the main ridge trail, and the group on the right is coming straight for us, Bear finished. Morrison must have gotten a report from his tracker about our general location. They watched as the rightmost group began climbing toward their position, moving cautiously but with obvious purpose. At the head of the column, Bear could make out a figure in an officer's uniform that had to be Morrison himself. 30 men in that group, Lily counted. All soldiers, all armed with military rifles. And they know exactly where they're going. Bear checked his weapons one final time. Then we give them the reception they deserve. The rocky outcropping they had chosen for their defensive position was about 200 yards above the main approach trail. Anyone trying to reach them would have to cross an open slope with no cover, making them perfect targets. But Bear knew that once Morrison's other groups realized where the fighting was, they would converge on this position quickly. Remember the plan. Bear said as they took their positions behind the stone barriers they had built. We make them pay heavily for every yard they advance. When they get too close, we fall back to the secondary position. Lily nodded, her face calm and focused despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Her time with the Apache had taught her to accept danger as a natural part of life. And Bear could see that warrior spirit in her eyes now. The advancing soldiers were still about 400 yards away when Morrison called a halt. Bear watched through his rifle scope as the captain deployed his men in a skirmish line, obviously planning a coordinated assault rather than a reckless charge. Then Morrison did something that surprised Bear. He stepped forward from his men and cupped his hands around his mouth to shout up the mountain, "McKinnon! I know you're up there. I want to talk." Bear and Lily exchanged glances. Neither of them had expected Morrison to try negotiation before violence. "What do you think he wants?" Lily whispered. "Probably trying to get us to reveal our exact position," Bear replied. "But maybe we can learn something too." Bear stood up just enough to be visible from below, keeping most of his body behind the stone barrier. "Say your piece, Morrison. But make it quick. You're harboring a dangerous fugitive, McKinnon. Turn over the woman and you can walk away from this." "She's not dangerous to anyone except people who murder innocent families," Bear shouted back. There was a pause before Morrison responded, and Bear could see him conferring with another officer. "The woman is wanted for treason against the United States. She provided aid and comfort to enemies of this nation. She fell in love with a man whose only crime was being born Apache." Lily suddenly stood up beside Bear, her voice carrying clearly across the mountainside. "And you killed him for it." Morrison's reaction was immediate and violent. Even at 400 yards, Bear could see the captain's body stiffen with rage. "Lily Collins," Morrison shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You cost me my brother's life." Both Bear and Lily were stunned by this revelation. Morrison's pursuit wasn't just about military duty or gold fever. It was about personal revenge. "Your brother?" Lily called back, confusion clear in her voice. "Lieutenant David Morrison. He was killed in an Apache raid 2 years ago." Morrison's voice was getting higher and more unstable. "A raid led by your precious Running Wolf." Bear saw Lily's face go pale. "That's impossible," she whispered, but loud enough for Morrison to hear. Running Wolf never raided settlements. His band was peaceful. Peaceful. Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Tell that to my brother's widow. Tell that to his children who will never see their father again." Bear began to understand the depth of Morrison's obsession. The captain wasn't just a career soldier following orders. He was a grieving brother consumed by the need for revenge. That made him both more dangerous and more unpredictable. "Captain Morrison," Bear called down, trying to inject some reason into the conversation. "Even if what you say is true, this woman wasn't responsible for your brother's death. She was married to the war chief who killed him. She lived in his lodge, shared his bed, bore witness to his planning." Morrison's voice was becoming increasingly hysterical. "She could have warned us, could have saved my brother's life, but she chose to protect savages instead." Lily suddenly stepped fully into view, standing tall and proud on the rocky outcropping. "You want to know the truth about your brother's death, Captain?" "Running Wolf told me about that fight." "Lily, get down!" Bear hissed, but she ignored him. "Your brother wasn't killed in a raid on settlers," Lily shouted down the mountain. "He was killed when he attacked Running Wolf's hunting party without warning. Your brother started that fight." Morrison's response was immediate and explosive. "Kill her!" he screamed to his men. "Kill them both!" The mountainside erupted in gunfire as 30 rifles opened up on their position. Bear tackled Lily to the ground as bullets whined overhead and crashed into the rocks around them. "So much for negotiation," Lily said grimly as they pressed themselves against their stone barriers. The initial volley was followed by disciplined rifle fire as Morrison's men began advancing up the slope in short rushes, using what little cover the terrain provided. Bear waited until they were within effective range, then began returning fire with careful aimed shots. His first bullet took down a sergeant who was directing his squad's advance. His second dropped a private who had gotten too far ahead of his unit. Bear's marksmanship and the defensive advantages of their position were taking a heavy toll on the attacking soldiers. Lily was proving to be an excellent shot as well, her Apache training serving her well in combat. She fired more sparingly than Bear, but every shot seemed to find its target. "They're pulling back," Lily observed as the soldiers sought cover behind rocks and scrub brush about 200 yards down the slope. But Bear could see Morrison regrouping his men for another assault, and he knew they couldn't hold this position indefinitely. Worse, he could hear gunfire from other directions as Morrison's remaining forces converged on their location. Time to fall back to position. 2, Bear said. They gathered their ammunition and began moving toward their secondary defensive position, a narrow cleft in the rocks about 50 yards back from their original spot. As they moved, Bear could hear Morrison screaming orders to his men. The second assault was better coordinated than the first. Morrison had learned from his initial losses and was using proper tactics now, suppressing fire to keep Bear and Lily pinned down while assault teams advanced under cover, but the terrain was still working against him. The rocky slope channeled his men into predictable approaches, and Bear knew every inch of this mountain. When the soldiers got close enough, he and Lily started rolling loose stones down on them, creating an avalanche of rocks that sent several men tumbling back down the mountainside. "Colonel Morrison," a new voice shouted from below. "This is Major Wilson. Cease fire immediately." The shooting stopped abruptly, and Bear could see a new group of soldiers arriving in the valley below. The newcomer wore the insignia of a higher rank than Morrison, and he was clearly not happy about what he was seeing. "Major Wilson," Morrison called back, his voice defensive. "I have authorization for this operation. You have authorization to apprehend a fugitive, not to conduct a full-scale battle in the middle of civilian territory." Wilson's voice carried clearly in the sudden quiet. "Stand down your men immediately." Bear and Lily watched as a heated argument developed between the two officers. Wilson had obviously been sent to investigate Morrison's increasingly extreme methods, and he didn't like what he had found. "This is our chance," Bear whispered. "While they're arguing, we can slip away." But Lily shook her head. "No, this ends here one way or another. I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of being hunted like an animal." Before Bear could stop her, Lily stood up and called down to the assembled soldiers. "Major Wilson, I'm Lily Collins, the woman your men are hunting. I want to surrender and tell my story to someone who might actually listen." Bear's heart nearly stopped as he watched Lily walk out from behind their defensive position, her hands raised but her head held high. After everything they had been through, everything they had shared, she was giving herself up to protect him. Morrison's reaction was immediate. "She's mine," he screamed, raising his rifle toward Lily. But Major Wilson was faster. His own weapon was already trained on Morrison when the captain made his move. The standoff between Major Wilson and Captain Morrison stretched across the mountainside like a held breath. Bear could see both officers with their weapons drawn, facing each other while Lily stood exposed on the rocks above them. "Captain Morrison, lower your weapon," Wilson commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of superior rank. "That's a direct order from your commanding officer." Morrison's rifle wavered, but he didn't lower it. "Sir, this woman is a traitor who cost American lives. She must be brought to justice." "Justice, Captain? Or revenge?" Wilson's tone was sharp. "I've been reviewing your reports about this operation, and I'm not impressed with what I've found." Bear realized that this Major Wilson might be their salvation. Someone higher up the chain of command had obviously sent him to investigate Morrison's increasingly extreme methods. "Major Wilson," Lily called down from her position, "I want to surrender to you personally, but I want guarantees that I'll receive a fair hearing, not a lynching disguised as military justice." Wilson looked up at her, his face grave but not hostile. "You have my word, Miss Collins. If you surrender peacefully, you'll be treated according to military regulations and given a proper hearing." "Don't listen to her, Major," Morrison interjected, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's a liar and a savage lover who can't be trusted. Captain Morrison, you will lower your weapon and step back, or I will have you arrested for insubordination," Wilson said coldly. Bear watched as Morrison slowly lowered his rifle, his face twisted with rage and frustration. The captain was clearly struggling with the realization that his personal vendetta was about to be derailed by proper military procedure. Lily began making her way down the rocky slope, moving carefully but with dignity. Bear wanted to follow her to stand beside her, but he knew that showing himself would only complicate the situation. "Miss Collins," Wilson called up to her as she approached. "Are you injured? Have you been mistreated?" "I'm fine, Major, but I have a story to tell that I think you need to hear." Lily continued her descent, ignoring the dozens of rifle barrels trained on her. When she reached the bottom of the slope, Wilson gestured for his men to lower their weapons. "Very well. You're under military custody, but you'll be treated with respect until we can sort this out properly." Morrison stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Major, you're making a terrible mistake. This woman has information that's vital to national security." "What kind of information, Captain?" Wilson asked, his tone suggesting he was beginning to see through Morrison's claims. Bear held his breath as he waited to see if Lily would reveal the secret about the gold. If she told Wilson about the Apache deposit, it would give Morrison exactly what he wanted. "Captain Morrison believes I know the location of Apache treasure," Lily said carefully. "He's convinced that my late husband told me secrets before he died." "And did he?" Wilson asked directly. Lily met the Major's eyes steadily. "Running Wolf told me many things, Major. He told me about honor and courage and protecting people who can't protect themselves. He told me about the difference between justice and revenge. But mostly, he told me that some secrets are too dangerous to share." Morrison could barely contain himself. "She knows where they hid their gold. Enough to fund the entire territorial government." Wilson studied Morrison with obvious distaste. "Captain, are you telling me this entire operation was motivated by gold fever, rather than legitimate military concerns?" "It's not gold fever, sir. It's about recovering assets stolen from American citizens." Morrison's voice was getting higher and more desperate. "What American citizens?" Wilson demanded. "Do you have documentation of any gold theft by Apache bands?" Morrison hesitated, and Bear could see that the captain had no evidence to support his claims. The gold deposit Running Wolf had shown Lily wasn't stolen. It was a natural formation the Apache had discovered on land they had lived on for generations. "The gold belongs to whoever can claim and work it," Morrison said finally. "That's the law of the territory." "No, Captain. That's the law of greed." Wilson turned to Lily with something approaching respect in his voice. "Miss Collins, I'm beginning to understand why you've been running from this man." Suddenly, Bear heard a sound that made his blood freeze, the distinctive click of a rifle hammer being pulled back. Morrison had quietly raised his weapon again while Wilson was distracted, and now had it aimed directly at Lily's back. "If I can't have the gold, then no one can," Morrison said, his voice calm and deadly. "And if I can't have justice for my brother, then I'll take revenge." Wilson spun around, but he was too far away to intervene. Morrison's finger was already tightening on the trigger when Bear's rifle cracked from the rocks above. The bullet took Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his shot wild. The captain stumbled and fell, his weapon clattering across the rocky ground. Bear stood up from his concealed position, his rifle still trained on Morrison. "Major Wilson, that man just tried to murder an unarmed prisoner. I'd say that settles any questions about his motives." Wilson looked from Bear to Morrison, who was writhing on the ground and clutching his wounded shoulder. "You're absolutely right, Mr. McKinnon. Sergeant Davis, place Captain Morrison under arrest for attempted murder." As the soldiers moved to restrain Morrison, the wounded captain looked up at Lily with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over," he gasped. "There are others who want that gold, others who will hunt you down." "Maybe," Lily said quietly, "but they'll have to get through Bear first. And after what I've seen, that's not going to be easy." Major Wilson spent the next hour interviewing both Bear and Lily, taking detailed statements about Morrison's actions and motivations. When he was finished, his conclusions were clear. "Miss Collins, based on what I've heard today, I'm recommending that all charges against you be dropped. You've committed no crimes against the United States, and you've been the victim of harassment by an officer who was using his position for personal gain." "What about the gold?" Lily asked. Wilson smiled grimly. "What gold?" "I've heard no credible evidence of any Apache treasure, and I don't intend to waste military resources chasing after prospectors' tails and get-rich-quick schemes." Bear felt a surge of relief. Wilson was choosing to ignore the gold deposit entirely, which meant Lily would be free to keep Running Wolf's secret safe. "Mr. McKinnon," Wilson continued, "you're free to return to your mountain cabin. The territorial government has no quarrel with you." "Actually, Major, I was thinking about traveling north," Bear said, looking at Lily. "I hear Canada's beautiful this time of year." Wilson understood immediately. "A wise choice. The territory is becoming overcrowded anyway. Too many people looking for easy fortune instead of honest work." As Wilson's men prepared to depart with Morrison as their prisoner, the major pulled Bear aside for a private word. "McKinnon, I want you to know that there are still decent people in the territorial government. Not everyone is like Morrison." Wilson glanced toward Lily, who was gathering her few possessions. "That woman has been through hell, but she's shown more courage and integrity than most soldiers I've served with." "She's the strongest person I've ever met," Bear agreed. "Take care of her. And watch your backs." Morrison was right about one thing. Word of Apache gold has a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. After the soldiers departed, Bear and Lily stood alone on the mountainside, watching the dust cloud disappear into the valley below. "So," Lily said, taking Bear's hand. "Canada?" "Canada," Bear confirmed. "Fresh start, new country, no one hunting us for crimes we didn't commit or treasure we don't want." "What about your cabin? Your trap lines? You've built a whole life in these mountains." Bear looked around at the peaks and forests that had been his home for 15 years. "It would be hard to leave, but not as hard as losing Lily would be. I built a life here because I was running from the world, but I'm not running anymore." Bear squeezed her hand gently. "I'm running toward something better." They spent that night in Bear's cabin packing essential supplies for the journey north. As they worked, Lily told Bear more about the gold deposit that had caused so much trouble. Running Wolf called it the tears of the earth, she said, carefully folding the few clothes she owned. He said the gold was beautiful, but that it made men do ugly things. "Do you ever think about going back to look at it?" Bear asked. "No. Running Wolf made me promise to let it stay hidden, and that's a promise I intend to keep." Lily looked up at Bear with those bright blue eyes. "Besides, I found something more valuable than gold." "What's that?" "A man who would fight the entire territorial army to protect me, even when he barely knew me. A man who sees past the brands on my arms to the person underneath." Lily smiled. "That's worth more than all the gold in the mountains." They left at dawn, riding north through high mountain passes that would take them beyond the reach of American law and the memories of their troubled past. Behind them they left 2 graves, Bear's wife and daughter, buried in a Kansas cemetery he would never visit again, and Lily's Apache family, buried in a hidden valley that existed now only in her heart. But ahead of them lay Canada, and the possibility of building something new together. They would face whatever challenges came as partners, watching each other's backs and sharing each other's burdens.